So I want to jump in here really quick from the future. Well, at least the future for this video. Sadie, they think now, didn't have pneumonia. I didn't know this until I went to her doctor's appointment. I didn't really understand what the doctor was saying when she discharged us, when she said it wasn't bacterial, that it was viral, and that it was the asthma. I was so confused because the x-ray had clearly said that she had pneumonia. And if an x-ray says she has pneumonia, doesn't she have pneumonia? When we left the hospital on Monday, after going to the ER because Sadie had had so many asthma attacks in a row and her inhaler wasn't working very well, there was probably about a 50% chance, according to the nurse, that we were going to be back. At least that's what she told me later when I talked to her. I mean, obviously everyone was hoping that was going to happen. Everyone was trying to set us up for success. We went and we saw her doctor on Wednesday, so 2 days later, and he was really concerned when we saw him because her chest still sounded really, really bad and her breathing sounded bad, and so he upped her nebulizer to 3 times a day. He wanted her to be using it 3 times a day, and so we were doing that. He extended her prednisone for another 3 days, so she'd been on it for 5 days. He wanted her on it for 8 days. He said she needed to come back in a week. She's still on the allergy medicine. She's still on the inhaled steroid Qvar. It was a lot. Thursday she seemed better and she went back to school, and that day she did have one time that she needed to use her inhaler at school, but other than that it was a pretty good day. And Wednesday she needed to use her inhaler only one time also. And then Friday came around. On Friday morning she woke up and she had a pretty scary asthma attack. We used her nebulizer, and I just didn't feel good about sending her to school at that point because her breathing sounded really bad to me without a stethoscope. Just being able to hear the way she was breathing, it sounded like she wasn't doing well. And that was the day that Tessie had an appointment with genetics at University of Michigan, and so we were going to be going to Mott's Children's Hospital. So I thought, you know what, if Sadie is going to be having another asthma attack, there's really no place in the state that I would rather have her be than there. So I decided that she wasn't going to be going to school that day. We got the other kids onto their school buses, headed to school, and we headed to the Children's Hospital really early. And we had our inhaler with us, and we were hoping we were going to have to use it. And I was probably asking her every few minutes, because I could hear her breathing, whether or not she was okay, and she kept saying she was. It hadn't really changed. She didn't feel worse. But we made that, it's like a hour-long drive. We made that hour-long drive, and by the time we got there, she was actually feeling a lot better. Sorry, I had to run out there really quick and turn down Dora because it was just way too loud. Anyways, so we got to the Children's Hospital, and just around when we finally got there, she finally started to feel like she was breathing better. I thought maybe we weren't going to be going to the ER. And we went to Tessie's appointment, and I have a video about that I've already posted. When the appointment was over, I asked her how she was feeling, and she said that she felt like her breathing was way better than it had been all that morning and the whole ride there. So I said, okay, let's go home then. There's not really any point in sticking around here if your breathing is better. So we got in the car and we headed home, and her breathing was fine the whole way home. We got home and she had just a perfectly normal afternoon. The boys got home from school. Maggie got home from school, and it was time for parent-teacher conferences. And Sadie's class has kid-led parent-teacher conferences where they had like a PowerPoint presentation to do. And so Sadie and I went to her conference and Patch's conference, and there was some time in between them, so we actually went outside because it was like 60 degrees, which is way warmer than it's been for months here. And we walked around, and it was beautiful, and we walked up this little hill near her school, and I was watching her and listening so closely to her breathing, and she sounded completely fine. And in my mind it was kind of a test. I had her inhaler right there with me, but I wanted to see if she could walk, 100 yards, because she needs to be able to do that if she's going to be going to school and she's walking all over and going to gym class and running around with her friends. So I kind of wanted to see if she could actually walk around before she went back to school the next day. And we were walking slowly. I was purposely kind of keeping her at a slow pace, but she was fine. We walked back, we went to her conference, it was great, and we went home. and she was fine. And on the way home we stopped and we went to the grocery store, and we really quickly went inside, got a bunch of groceries. We were trying to go fast to get home as fast as we could so that Nanny could go home and have dinner, and we did that, and then we went home, still fine. I made dinner and nothing was out of the ordinary, and then she ate dinner. And sometime during dinner something went wrong. And she came over to me and she was shivering, and I was wearing a tank top. It was 75 degrees in the house and I was sweating. It felt so hot. And she came over to me and she asked me if she could turn the heater on. And I said, could you go tell me what it says on the heater right now? Because it feels really warm to me. She went over and she goes, it says 75 right now on the thermostat. And I said, okay, no, we can't turn it above 75 to make the heater come on. Why don't you get a blanket and wrap yourself up and sit down if you're feeling that hot? And so she did, and at that point her breathing still felt fine. A few minutes later it didn't feel fine. And so I took her downstairs and, well, first I had her use her emergency inhaler. It worked not very well. I mean, it made it so she could breathe, but it didn't make it so she could breathe well. So we went downstairs, and about 20 minutes later, it was time anyways for her nebulizer treatment. And honestly, I was trying to find her emergency action plan, and I found it. And I hooked her up to her nebulizer, and she was laying on the bed, hooked up to the nebulizer. I read through the emergency plan treatment, and I was talking to her, and she just started to seem really out of it and weird while we were talking. She wasn't herself at all. She seemed confused and just not... She could breathe, but she wasn't herself. Now, I should probably say that the confusion wasn't like it was super obvious. It wasn't like she was super disoriented or anything. It was just when I talked to her, she didn't seem like herself. Her answers weren't totally there. She was off. It was not like talking to her. It wasn't like how it normally is when I'm talking to her. And I mean, she can be pretty silly, but it was just really weird. It wasn't my normal Sadie. I called the doctor call line and I told them the information, and they said, don't be afraid to go to the hospital. I'll put the message through to the doctor. If you don't hear in 30 minutes, call back. Within 30 seconds, the phone rang, and it was her doctor on the line. And she said, she listened, and I think she gasped like 3 times during the conversation when I said we'd used her inhaler, we'd used the nebulizer. It didn't seem to be helping that much. The nebulizer was just running out at that point. And I just finished, but her breathing still sounded really bad. I could hear it. It hadn't seemed to help. She said, oh, I know it. At that point, she was saying that her chest hurt really, really badly, especially on the right side. And she seemed confused. And the right side was significant because in the chest x-ray, and when they listened to her, no, not in the chest x-ray, when they had listened to her in the hospital and in the doctor's office, they kept saying that her right side sounded worse than her left side, and they were having a hard time hearing the air moving around in it. So her doctor said, I think you need to take her to the hospital right now. You need to get her in the car and take her to the ER. And so we did. I got her in the car, and I told Paul that I needed to take her to the ER. And I called my mom as we were getting ready, and I asked my mom, because my mom lives 3 miles away, I asked my mom if she wanted to meet me as we were driving to the highway and jump in the car with us and go with us. And so she did. We met on our way, and she jumped out of my dad's car, ran over, jumped in the passenger seat of our car, and we headed down the highway to the hospital. We got there. We went inside. The hospital waiting room on a Friday night was slammed with every person you could imagine in there. It took a while to even get to the pediatric room, which once we finally got to the pediatric ER, it was so fast. But getting to the pediatric ER was kind of a nightmare. So we finally got sent to the pediatric ER. And as soon as we got triaged and sent to the pediatric ER to be triaged again, they took her straight back because it was a breathing thing. And he listened to her breathing and he said, her breathing doesn't actually sound all that bad. And I thought, that's great. The albuterol finally worked. I was watching the oxygen levels on her, and I think it was below 95 consistently the entire time. And that's just not, when she's feeling well, it's not like 91 all the time. It's usually above 95. After she's used her inhaler, even when she was sounding really, really bad, her oxygen was still higher. And so I was just kind of wondering, and he took her temperature, and she had a temperature of 99, but he thought that was because she was breathing through her mouth. And so they took her straight to her room. They took her temperature again under her arm, and her underarm temperature was over 100. And so the doctor came in, actually first a PA came in and listened to her again and said that her lungs sounded pretty bad, especially her right lung. And then she said she wasn't sure she'd ever had asthma and that it might be pneumonia, and that could be what's causing this whole thing. It could all be viral, and that all of these attacks could just be viral. And so she left, and that she was going to go talk to the attending and find out more, and she left. Sadie was really, really freaking out because she was just afraid that she was going to get admitted and have to have an IV and a blood draw. Then a few minutes later, they come back in and they have the phlebotomist with them, and they have a bag of saline, and Sadie's like almost full-on panic attack. And the doctor comes in, who was amazing, and she immediately turns around and asks them to go get a buzzy. That's the little vibrating thing that they put on your arm that vibrates, so you hopefully won't feel it as much unless you're just like super panicked by needles like she is, and then you're like hyper focused on what's happening to your arm. She came in and listened and ordered a chest x-ray, and she ordered her blood to be drawn, and she ordered an IV to be placed and her blood to be drawn out of the IV. Sadie was pretty stressed about that. The doctor actually, she held the little buzzy on there while they did it and wiped up the blood afterwards. She was absolutely amazing. She was definitely a mom comforting Sadie. Her bedside manner was amazing. And they took us over to get her chest x-ray. Sadie was, at that point, she was so scared to bend her arm. She was like, we kept telling her she could bend her arm, and she was keeping it perfectly straight. She was so stressed out about it. It wasn't until the next day that she would bend it at all. After she fell asleep and woke up with it, then she started finally like bending it a tiny bit. That was a little bit difficult during the chest x-ray, but they were able to get the chest x-ray. And they came in and said that she had pneumonia and that it was especially bad in her right lung. They also said that her white blood cells count was through the roof, and something that started with a C. Okay, I can't remember. It was something that started with a C. Some of you probably know what it is. It was a marker of inflammation, and that was really high too. And so they were going to be admitting her, at least for the night, and giving her a lot of antibiotics until it was under control. And so they started with azithromycin orally and hooking her up to a IV of Rocephin and transferring her upstairs to pediatrics. About 1 o'clock in the morning, we finally got upstairs to the room that she was going to be admitted into. And I stayed until about 2, getting her checked in, answering all the questions. Then my mom spent the night, and I came home because the other kids had school the next morning, and Patrick had pajama day, and I wanted to make sure he had pajamas, the right pajamas to wear to school that I knew he would want, which were his PJ Masks pajamas. So I got home at about 2:30 and slept for three and a half. I came home and slept for 3.5 hours, and got up and got all the kids dressed. Maggie, James, and Tessie didn't have school. Only Patrick had school, so we got Patrick off to school. Paul took him to school. I was incredibly thankful that he didn't have an early morning court appointment or anything. And then I called my dad and asked him if he could drive me and the kids into the hospital, and then my mom and I would switch places, and my mom could come out and I would go in, and she could come home and they would take care of the kids. She could finally shower, change her clothes, all that, because it's not like we brought clothes. So I went in and saw Sadie, and a doctor came in, and he said that it was pneumonia, and he ordered ampicillin and had that put on her, and that after she finished that, she could come off of fluids, and that and he wanted her to be drinking a lot of water to show that she could drink water and keep those fluids down and going, and that if she could, she would be able to come home with oral antibiotics, then she could come home with oral antibiotics to finish off the pneumonia, and that was the plan for the day. Hopefully we'd get to go home in the afternoon. We waited, and then rounds came around in the afternoon. It was later than they told us it was going to be. I think it was It was after lunchtime. They said it was going to be between 9 and 11, and it ended up being after lunchtime. So it was a new doctor, and when she came in, she said actually she didn't think that this was bacterial. She felt like it was viral, and that because at this point they were starting to doubt downstairs, when we were downstairs, they'd been doubting whether or not she ever had asthma, which we kind of thought she did because Paul and I both do, and we've sort of suspected it her whole life from various things that have happened, her bouts of wheezing, stuff like that. We have brought it up to doctors before, but no one ever seemed overly concerned because it had never gotten this bad. So she came in and she asked me a lot of questions basically about her whole life history, like having eczema, having these wheezing attacks, having constant coughing, just all sorts of things. And she listened and she said, okay, yeah, I think that she does have asthma. I think that this is viral, and I think that the virus has just really inflamed her asthma and made it get so out of control that this is happening. I don't think it's bacterial. I think we can spare her the antibiotics. I'm sending you home without antibiotics, and we'll test it out. And if she gets sicker again, we'll come back, we'll readmit her, we'll start the antibiotics back up. I was like, okay. I was so nervous at that point because it just kind of seemed like, I don't know, again, it seemed like 50-50. The first time we were released, it seemed 50-50 that we were going to be back there. The second time we were released, it really did seem like we were doing this 50% thing where maybe we'd be back, maybe we wouldn't. But it was scary because when she can't breathe, it's so scary. It was scary to go home with this like maybe 50% chance of what's going to happen next. And so one of the residents came in and went over the action plan with me again. No more nebulizer. She's to use her inhaler every 4 hours. She's to go off of the prednisone steroid, just use the inhaled steroid. And she's to see her doctor first thing Monday morning, and then they can decide how they want to proceed.
I don't know what I'm saying. Get your fingers off that thing, kid. Yeah, you're definitely feeling better.
I got 3 hours of sleep and she tried to steal my chair, so I took her hospital bed and now she's trying to fold me up in it. So we went home and I was just like, please, please let this work. And actually her nurse came in, and when her nurse came in and saw that they weren't sending us home with antibiotics, she came in and she goes, there's no antibiotic prescriptions here, where are they? And I said, they're not doing antibiotics, she thinks it's viral. And she goes, hold on, I need to talk to the doctor, this can't be right. And she went back out, and then the next thing I do, another nurse comes in, and she was our new nurse. And so we went home without antibiotics. And it has been fine. She has been fine. She hasn't had to use her rescue inhaler since we've been home. She has used her Ventolin every 4 hours and her QVAR in the morning and at night, and so far she has not had another attack since then. So it's really nerve-wracking. She has been taking it really easy since then, and I'm really glad that it's spring break and that she's going to have a week off for us to know that this is under control before she goes back to school. Because it's just a little nerve-wracking, her being in school with this going on. It's just kind of I don't know, it's scary. I am thankful that this is spring break, so. That is the latest. It's Sunday. She's been home since Friday afternoon, and I guess that means since Friday afternoon she hasn't had an asthma attack, which is the longest she had gone. She'd had one every single day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. She'd had at least one up to like 4 a day. So this is definitely the longest we've gone since this whole thing started, of having a lot of them every day, and the intensity too. So I'm hoping that this is a sign that things have kind of calmed down and gone back to what it was like before, where she would rarely have wheezing and she had lots of coughing, but I'm hoping that this means we can just get it all under control and finally figure out once and for all what's going on, and maybe finally get the coughing under control, the perpetual coughing that she's had her whole entire life that drives her sister crazy, because that would be really nice too. So I want to jump in here really quick from the future. Well, at least the future for this video. Sadie, they think now, didn't have pneumonia. I didn't know this until I went to her doctor's appointment. I didn't really understand what the doctor was saying when she discharged us, when she said it wasn't bacterial, that it was viral, and that it was the asthma. I was so confused because the x-ray had clearly said that she had pneumonia. And if an x-ray says she has pneumonia, doesn't she have pneumonia? So I was just thinking, viral pneumonia? Is that a thing? I mean, it is a thing, right? So she still had pneumonia. But today we had Sadie's doctor's appointment. And so I asked the doctor, what did they mean? What did they mean when they said it was viral and sent her home without antibiotics? And I mean, she's been fine with antibiotics, so that means they were right? And she paused. And I said, because it said on the x-ray that she had pneumonia. They saw it. I mean, we saw it. And she said that it probably meant that part of her lung had collapsed, because a collapsed lung looks like pneumonia. And so it probably meant that her asthma wasn't treated aggressively enough in the beginning, although I don't know what else they could have done short of admitting her that first time, which I guess she probably should have been admitted that first time. But I mean, they gave us a nebulizer, they gave us she was on every medicine she possibly could have been on at home. She was using that thing nonstop. Basically she thought that part of her right lung had collapsed, and that was what they were seeing that looked like pneumonia on the x-ray, and that now we're just going to keep really aggressively treating her asthma throughout spring. And now, of course, she's going back in a month and they will recheck her, and if anything happens before then, we will call. But it's all been kind of crazy. And it's really hard to believe that 9 days ago, she didn't even have an inhaler. So back to your regularly scheduled post. Anyways, that is it for today. That is the Sadie update. If you like this video, we'd love it if you would give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in all things autism, which is what we actually usually talk about around here, we would love it if you would hit that red subscribe button down below. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.